Just making some micro adjustments here to my screen. There you go. So, all right. So, good morning, everyone. Greetings from Edmonton. Thanks for the introduction. So, I think we can jump into the study overview already. I know I'm a bit off the coding and programming side of things in here, but bear with me. There are bits of programming in here that might be interested. So, my presentation will be more on the visual side of things and the design side of things. So these work, just to give you an overview, it's also part of my PhD thesis. So the third and chapter 5 of it, which is about to be completed. So it is a complement of the whole study about Juiciness and interactive infographics. So for this study, more specifically, the goal was to perform this comparison between juicy and dry approaches into interactive infographics. And I'll come into the concept of juiciness shortly, but the idea was to see if we apply this concept into interactive infographics, would it be helpful or would it support user engagement, like enhancing levels of user engagement? And also, would it help with information or short-term information retention, right? So basically, in other words, would people remember more about the content that they were just exposed to? So would it somewhat get in the way, right? So the question of the research is how does the incorporation of juicy design elements in interactive infographics influence user engagement and information retention compared to dry, regular designs, right? And the hypothesis for those, so we have two main hypotheses I had two main hypotheses of these study, which were interactive infographics with juicy elements will result in higher user engagement scores than dry, regular infographics. And the number two was users interacting with those infographics that would make use of juicy elements would also uh, perform better in terms of short-term information rates, right? Like retaining those information compared to dry, regular infographics. But I'm talking about infographics, and maybe you're familiar with the concept of infographics, although I know that some people they know what an infographic is, but they don't recall that as the name of infographic, right? And Juiciness is way beyond that. So if you're not from if you don't come from a game perspective or game design background, juiciness might be something that you talk more about, like the drink or how juicy a meat is, like a slice of meat is, right? So which is completely off the scope in here. So talking about first about the idea of interactive infographics. So I have just a I'm not going to play it entirely, but interactive infographics, they are, so infographics, they combine graphics and image. So basically they do a balance of image, visual content, apart from text, right? So icons, images, animations and all that. And they balance that with textual components, so bits of text, in order to facilitate the digest of information, right? So the idea is that we have a visual summary of a content that will complement some sort of information or that will explain the whole concept on its own, but instead of using just text, it will make use of images at the same time. And interactive infographics, they come from that same base, but they incorporate some interactive elements. So you can click around on things, right? So to put it into simple terms, you can click around on things and see things happening. It might be clicking, it might be using your keyboard, but basically you have some interactive components. So this is an example that's called OptiCamera. I'm not going to play with the sound, but basically with this guy in here, you can click in a interact with a bunch of elements in there, and you use your arrow keys from the keyboard to have these animations taking place, and you go through a story. right, in there by controlling everything. And you can advance, fallback. So it's a massive project. And the group is called Project Optimer, and they talk about the idea of like manipulating images to making the use of a combination of static images and making them animated, right? So through frame by frame animations as well, right? So this is just an example. So this is the to provide you with a concept or a background of what interactive infographics are. Now, when it comes to juiciness, again, all of you, I'm pretty sure you have at least once in your lifetime played a video game, right? And juiciness is that idea of bountiful, like a high quantity of feedback based on a single input by the user. So this is an example game called Fruit Ninja. Maybe some of you have played that, or maybe you're aware of that, but it's just one example, right? It could be Candy Crush, which is probably on the spectrum in there where people have played at least like one of those casual games. But you can name it like think about anything, even Minecraft and other types of games, they will incorporate these concepts in there. So juiciness, it's like a lot of special audio visual effects. So we have animations, we have particle systems, we have the idea of persistence, which is this idea of like, as you can see, the splatters of the sliced fruits in there, they still persist for a while in the background as if they were like hitting the wall in there, and also sound effects. So all the sound feedback that you get from your input. And ideally it's about like you do one thing and you get lots of rewarding. It's the feeling of rewarding, so you get over and over like a stimulus on top of that, which possibly and hopefully will make the game more engaging, right? And also visually appealing. So in a way, juiciness will enhance the user experience and the player experience if we're talking about games, right? And within infographics, the idea is that they would enhance user experience or the navigation or the content assets in there, right? So you do something and then you see, you will feel amazed by that. You will get lots of nice return visually and from audio as well, right? So that was basically the background, and we relate those. And again, there was not much work relating visual data or data visualization with the idea of juiciness. They incorporate other concepts such as micro interactions and then animations and stuff like that. But the idea of incorporating and creating an infographic purposefully designed with the concept of juiciness within them is fairly new. So for the methods, because we wanted to do these A/B tests, right? So juicy versus dry, and I'm gonna refer to the regular version of the infographics as dry versions because they don't have the juicy component within them, right? So I developed three infographics. One of them was partially developed by me because it was a piece that was already available online. But the other two, I developed both the dry and the juicy version of them. Always starting by the juicy version because they are more complicated. They incorporate more features. And then creating the dry counterpart, which is like removing all those layers of interactions in there in the visual aspect. So the first one of them is called is it was an existing infographic that is called the daily routines of famous creative people, and I have it open in here, and I'm happy to share that with you. So basically, in these infographic, you are able to navigate through different names in here. So as you can see here, we have Benjamin Franklin, we have Charles Darwin, we have, for example, Pablo Picasso. So all those names in there, and you can see how their hours were divided throughout their day, right? So from 12 a.m. all the way to 12 a.m. again. And you can toggle uh, these categories here on and off, right? So if you want to see their creative work only, and then compare that with the food and leisure, and if you scroll on top of the little information in here, you're gonna get like more information about each celebrity or creative people in there, right? Unfortunately, these this website is not available anymore with the original link, so you have to use the Wayback Machine, right, through the Internet Archive to be able to access it. So I've created the Juicy counterpart for this guy, and I've used a software called Construct, right? And I can even like refresh the screen in here just so you can see, because my version, it also starts already with like an animation of everything like popping up. I believe I'm sharing my sound in there, so you might be able to hear some stuff. You see like this pop sounds in there, and then I've added like a little spinning into the clock in here, which was not present on the original one. You can scroll up and down, and then when I click on each one of them, like by hovering on top of them, they grow and they diminish as well. They return to the original size. And if I click in one of them, instead of like just fading in and out, they will move down and up, kind of bouncing randomly in there. So if we do like that, you will see that the screen shakes a little bit, which is another component. So I can turn these guys on and off, right? And as you can see by each click that I do in there, there are some particles that will fly from the bigger square in there, the bigger category. Right? So that was the first one. The second one was one thing that I created entirely by myself, which is called Burcalories. So I decided to create something as a lover, right? So I decided to create something where the user would be able to build up their burgers with a couple of toppings in there, having access to some nutritional values, and see how that would be represented in terms of calories, fat, carbs, and proteins, right? With a little introduction. So again, for this guy, I've created let me close these two in here. So I have a dry version in here, which basically, if you click, you will see that the burger gets higher, right? So, and you'll see that the values changing in here. So yeah, pretty simple stuff. And if you want to remove an item, you just simply try to click on top of them, and you will remove them little by little, right? Now, the juicy counterpart, it's basically the same concept, but we have some animations, right? So it slowly appear and fades in, and then you will see the buns in there. So the initial bun will appear in there, will fly from the top, and now there are some layers of animation. So you see the pop sounds again, and then a little sound from the burgers, like the items in there colliding one another, and there are some physics on the burgers as well. So I can make like an infinite burger, right? And if I leave it at a certain point, it will kind of collapse. But I can take care of that as well. So in this time around, instead of like, well, as you can see, it start to fall, but I can do something like that, and then there you go. Everything will fall entirely. Oh, and even my bun now is kind of messed up. So but there you go. You can play around with all these elements, and I couldn't get rid of my bun. There you go. And they will fall down again, right? So that was the juicy version for the Burcalories one. And then finally, we have a third one in here that is called the main chakras, right? So again, motivated by personal practices of yoga and meditation. So which was an infographic to basically show you the seven um, main chakras that your body have aligned in there, right? And again, I have a dry version of it, which is straightforward. So you click around, you go to next, and then so you would have to click on each of those bouncy things in there. Once they align, you can click on top of them to get more information. And that was about it. Now, on the juicy counterpart, so again, if I refresh the screen, there will be some sounds playing in there. So you see like lots of layers on animation. So for example, the begin button in here is floating up and down. I can click it, and then we're gonna have like a little introduction about the chakras, right? And and then each of the seven main chakras. So if I click on next, the infographic itself actually starts. So there's a little animation in here for the floating meditator coming by, and now instead of like just popping in and out, they're floating, right? And you see all the particles. So all I have to do is try to catch one of them, right? So chakras are misaligned or unaligned, so you have to move your mouse on top of one of them. They will stop, and then you will see a little highlight on top of the body where you will have to click and drag your chakra in there, right? And there will be a little sound, so I'll try to complete it quickly to show you how they work, right? And then by clicking one of them, you see there's a little sound, and then every information will be like slowly displayed, right? So as if you have to breathe in and out, and then there's like all of them, they're floating around with the idea of like up and down from meditation practices as well, right? And as you can see, we still keep like the particle systems and everything in there. So those were the main infographic, like the three infographics that were created for these study. And then we went for a user test, right? So the way we did it was because we like I wanted to measure. I keep saying we, but I wrote the whole thing by myself. So the way I wanted to do that was to measure if people would remember about information. So I had to make it in a way where the same user would test two different infographics, right? Because if they test both the dry and the juicy version of the same infographic, they would be exposed to the same type of information twice. So that would make the process of remembering the information possibly easier, right? So what we did, or what I did instead, I created a little group. So I had a total of like 54 participants. And we created groups, so they were equally divided into three groups of 18 participants each. And then for each group, they went for one dry infographic and then one juicy infographic. So for example, group one, the daily routines dry and the Burcalories juicy. Group two, Burcalories dry and then main chakras juicy. And finally, group three, main chakras dry and then daily routines juicy, right? So that was to balance the trial. And in order to measure the engagement levels from each infographic version, we use the user engagement scale by O'Brien, and basically it has like a longer version with up to 30 or 31 items, but there's a short version of these user engagement of this scale as well, which is broken down into 10 items only, which would be enough for people to go through the test, right? So basically you have uh, six big groups from the bigger version, but then focused attention, perceived usability, aesthetic appeal, endurability, novelty, and felt involvement, right? So, and then each one of them with their own explanation in there. And in the short version, the endurability, novelty, and felt involved, they were converted into a reward factor. So they come down in here, right? And then of course the wording for each of the questions, they were adapted to the product that we had, which in this case were infographics. So as you can see in the original one would be this application or this experience. So we always change it to infographic, and each user would have to pick from strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree from 1 to 5, right? Which would generate a scale to be evaluated afterwards, and the results will come later. So and then that was to measure user engagement levels. And then for the short-term information retention, we went for questions, right? Most of them, or for two of them, we went for an open-ended question. So for the daily routines, we asked the user from memory, name as many daily routines categories as you can. So those weren't the top ones that you saw on the top of that infographic, right? So food, leisure, sleep, work, and other, right? So for them to name it, and then basically going in writing down, we created like a Google Forms in there, and they had to write down. And the question two was, what is your takeaway from this infographic? Please elaborate your answer with as much detail as you can. So in this question, the idea was to capture from the user like Do you have anything to say at all regarding the infographic? So, what did you learn from it? But basically, to see what would be their questions, right, and their answers. Sorry, regarding the infographic. So for the Burcalories, we went for a multiple choice, two multiple choice questions, where they would need to remember about specific data from the infographic. So which of the following items has the most carbs, right? And then we would provide like them with a couple of choices, and the answer was chicken, the chicken patty. And then the question two was which of the following elements is the most caloric, and then also multiple choice, and also the same answer was the burger, the chicken patty for them. And then the takeaway question again that was applied to all of them. And finally, for the main chakras, again, we back to two questions. From memory, name as many chakra body locations as you can. So they didn't have to remember about the original name of the chakra, right? But instead, the body location, so the crown, throat, solar plexus, root, and the other ones in there, right? To see if they would be able to remember, and how many they would be able to remember. So that being applied, the way it worked, like each user would interact with an infographic, go to the answers, go back to a second infographic, and go to the answers again, and then we would collect all that, analyze the data, and get into the results. So the results from the user engagement scale, they show that although the numbers are still small, right, the juicy versions always had higher scores. I know that it's like sometimes, as you can see, it's like 0.05 the difference in there, which is very low. But they show overall higher scores, which shows potential to explore that with like a larger amount of users. For this research, I was kind of rushed because it needed to be a part of the PhD as well. But the samples still show some data that can be analyzed, right? So we have, as you can see, always the dry version, which is the initial one, is like a bit shorter, and the higher difference was with the Burcalories one. And still with the subscales, the focus, the tension, perceived usability, aesthetic appeal, and reward factor. The perceived usability, which was in terms of like negatives, did you feel overwhelmed by that, or like did you get lost in a bad way within the experience, like felt super distracted? So they showed higher scores as well for all of them, right? So the perceived usability was actually the higher score between all of them, and the lowest one was probably the focused attention. So we also collected some feedback and takeaways from the answer. So from the daily routines of famous creative people, we both infographics, they generally showed, they found to be interesting and informative, and people were curious about daily habits of famous creative people that were in there. So we have some comments regarding enjoyments, right? So I really enjoyed the interactivity with the infographics, simply direct, achieving its goal of making data visualization easier to use. That's for the drive version. And then the current part, the fact that I could filter the categories was really attractive to me. The interactive nature of both infographics was also seen as a positive aspect. So people were happy about being able to interact with that instead of being a passive viewer in front of it. And but then of course there's always negative aspects, right? So they felt like some of them they felt lost, um, but and mentioning there was a lot of information and too much to absorb, right? And so that was felt to be overwhelming both in both versions, right? And the idea was not like we're not changing the amount of information they're gonna have access to. The I was changing the how this information would be displayed and delivered. For the Burcalories, we again, good comments about interactivity and being able to play around, right? So lots of comments that were mentioned, like the ability to play of it. And then there's also the component that people who, the users who tested the dry version, they were not aware of the juicy version, right? When they were introduced, they were presented to the infographics, they didn't have any clue that, oh, this is a juicy infographic and this is a dry infographic. So that made it very neutral, right? So they experimented whatever they had to, which is also an opportunity which will be mentioned later. So respondents from both versions noted that the interactive nature of the two made it engaging. Uh, it was visually appealing as well, and many comments regarding the ease of use of that. It was somewhat simple to use, and which also helped with the fun. And the common issue, particularly with the drive version, was regarding removing ingredients. So some people asked, like, argue if would it be better to have like a plus and minus button to remove each item, right? So adding an extra layer in there. But then the comment of like having fun was a good aspect. And then finally, from the chakras one, it was a good introduction for many of them, like learning more about the chakras. So that was probably a new concept for many of the respondents, and so sparking curiosity as well. And but some of them also complained about the idea of like having to chase the moving elements. They would Some users would prefer to be able to simply click around or see them building up. So for some users, we can see that only the dynamic component of an infographic would be enough in a way. And then so yeah, and then so some of the comments in here. Um, so having to chase was not very fun in their opinion, but some of them also found that the colors were nice and other comments like that. When it comes to information retention, so we had the metrics in there where we put it to the test, like from the daily routines infographic, a comparison between the dry and the juicy version. The dry version, the juicy version did better with in terms of average recall and perfect recalls as well, 6 out of 6, and total recalls like 5 out of 6, out of 6. So as you can see, and even like with the dry version, it will um, succeed for some of them. So 3 out of 6, 2 out of 6, and out of 6, they are almost the same. And just as a curiosity, like it was interesting to see that the most recalled category was related to sleep, right? And the last recalled category was other on the dry version and other also on the juicy version. Um, the Burcalories, we had the questions, right? So which of the following items has the most carbs? So on the dry version, most of the answers got it right with the chicken patty, but we can, like, it's not possible to assume that they got it from the infographic itself. Maybe they were also already aware of that information, right? On basic nutritional knowledge from food. And the juicy version, like the majority also said the chicken patty, but it was tied up with the cheddar, the cheese slice in there. So in a way, they got it right, but it's not possible to confirm that it was from the infographic. And the second question was, which of the following elements is the most caloric? Now here we have an interesting finding, which in the dry version, chicken patty was again the like the majority of the right answers, and it's confirmed the right answer. And then from the juicy version, actually only 5.6% said that, and then the majority went for the bacon strip, right? And so in here again, we can assume that they didn't necessarily were able to get the information from the infographic. And for the main chakras, so the metric was again the dry versus the juicy version, the average correct chakra location, and so we have 3.78 for the dry version, and then the juicy version doing better. The mode, most frequent score as well, so 6 out of 6 participants. Participants with 0 correct, only 1 in the juicy version, and then 3 with the dry version, and participants with 7 correct, 3 from the dry version and 2 from the juicy version. And then, but participants recalling 5 or more chakras, 8 from the dry version and 10 from the juicy version. And then here, the mentions in there. So the heart was the most recalled one from both of them, and then in the dry version, the sacral was the last one, the least one, and then the root for the juicy version. So on that, right, the conclusions and suggestions for future work. So the proposed hypotheses are partially confirmed, right? So for number one, um, the idea that juicy elements will result in higher user engagement scores than dry regular infographics wasn't identified for all of them, although with like lower numbers, but it was like the juicy versions always promoted like higher numbers versus their counterparts, their dry counterparts. Now for the second one, we had the higher rates of short-term information retention for the daily routines of most creative people and the main chakras. And the burger one, the Burcalories was the one that failed on that one, right? So finally, the findings suggest that it can significantly enhance user experience. So it has the potential, right, by making interactions more enjoyable, immersive, and aesthetically pleasing. But they need to be thoughtfully considered, right? So meaningfully considered as well. Like, what is the right amount of juiciness to incorporate to avoid an infographic or an information to become overwhelming and too much. So maybe excessive feedback will be reserved for more game-like experiences, less for data visualization. And then for future work, so maybe trying out with more robust softwares like Unity or an Unreal Engine, and using 3D to and more complex coding as well, verifying if different visual styles offer similar or distinguished results. So would it be the same if we have like if we create a three-dimensional infographic in there with more to visualize? And then also put to the test, like comparing the same versions of the infographics to see if they would somewhat change in terms of engagement levels and information retention, right? So maybe trying out an experiment with more spaced out times, and then seeing if people would even notice the changes between those infographics. So using one and then waiting a little bit of time, using the second one, and see if they would even able to be able to perceive those changes. There you go. So that's about it. So thank you very much. I'm more than happy to answer